My name is Natalie Haddad. I'm a filmmaker, and I want to tell you a story about one of the most beautiful places I have ever seen.
The Pilliga is just this amazing bank of biodiversity.
It's the largest unfragmented forest in Eastern Australia. The Pilliga is so culturally significant to Gomori people. It's nurtured and protected them for so long, and they've protected the forest in return.
I stand under Gomori law to protect water, air and totem. We've looked after this place since the sun hit the ground.
So as we were walking through the forest in this beautiful dense bush, just right in the middle, you come to a clearing, and it's a gated clearing. You can't walk past the fence. There had been a contamination event a couple years ago that had leached toxic sludge into the Pilliga forest.
Uranium 20 times the safe levels has seeped from a test site in North West New South Wales.
And you could see this trail of where the trees had died along this slowly moving trail of poison.
And as you can see, there's a lot of dead trees in that pathway.
That was just killing everything in its path. And then you realize that that's just one part, that's just one water treatment facility and one well. And Santos, the gas company, is going to be building 850 of these wells throughout the Pilliga forest. But the project doesn't stop at 850 wells in the Pilliga. If you go to the New South Wales government website, you can see this for yourself. The government has approved exploration licenses for gas companies to expand to here. This is the largest project ever proposed in New South Wales. So I spoke to Narrabri locals, traditional custodians, farmers, experts in gas extraction, hydrology, and climate change. I want to know what gas is going to do to our water, our ecosystems, our communities, and our climate.
What I have seen can be likened to an invasion, a slow, creeping, insidious takeover of land, air and water. The proponents' attempt to justify the project are based on misrepresentation and a cherry-picking approach to data and facts. In New South Wales, we are faced with a situation whereby the company Santos and the government refer to the Queensland experience as being a positive one. When something is negative and bears further investigation, government agencies in New South Wales, like the EPA, say that's Queensland, that won't happen in New South Wales. From our experience though, Santos will operate in much the same way.
So in order to understand the effects of gas mining, we've got to understand the process of it. So how does a gas company extract their gas? First, Santos has to find the gas, and the gas that they're looking for is found in the coal seams deep underground. But these coal seams are naturally filled with water.
To get the gas to flow, they have to remove that water and basically reduce the pressure of that water enough to allow the gas to start to flow. Now, being buried in the coal seams for a long time, that water has often picked up salts, it's often picked up heavy metals. In some parts of the world, it even picks up radionuclides, whether it be radium or others, and say uranium.
But it's the gas that Santos wants, and to extract it, this toxic water needs to be brought up to the surface. So to get to the coal seams, Santos will drill through the aquifer and layers of rock. A steel casing is lowered, and cement is pumped around it to separate it from the aquifer. Once the drill head reaches the coal seams, it turns 90 degrees and continues horizontally. It can continue drilling for up to 400 meters, so this means that even if a gas well isn't on your property, you can still have a gas company drilling underneath you. Then a perforating gun fires holes into the coal seams. Fracking fluid is then pumped at a high pressure and creates cracks in the rocks. This releases the gas. The fracking fluid is made up of a mixture of sand, water, and chemicals. We'll talk about the chemicals that are used later. Once the coal seams are at a high enough pressure, the produced water that now has gas flowing through it is brought up to the surface to be separated. So what happens to all this toxic water that they've just brought up to the surface?
So initially we produce millions of gallons of water, and that causes huge problem to the environment. And then you extract the gas. So what we are going to do with this water, we just leave the water in big ponds, because right now we don't pump back the water where it came.
The water is left in holding ponds. This water is so toxic that if the ponds leak or overflow in heavy rains, it can contaminate the entire area around it.
The company says the contamination has been caused by leakage from an old dam site. This has happened before. 3 years ago, 10,000 litres of wastewater seeped into the Pilliga forest. Testing found that toxic sludge had unsafe levels of arsenic and lead.
Gas companies claim that their fracking fluid is made up of around 1% chemicals. So let's take a look at the chemicals that are used in fracking fluid. So this is a biocide. It's used in industrial cleaning. This eliminates bacteria in water. This is a household bleach. This is used for corrosion protection or antifreeze. This is used in laundry detergents. This is hair bleach. So just because a gas company is using household chemicals, it doesn't mean that it's safe. An average well uses 15 million litres of fracking fluid. 1% of that would be 150,000 litres of chemicals per well. Now times that by 850 wells that are going to be built in the Narrabri Gas Project. And we're looking at 127 million litres of chemicals that are going to be used throughout the Pilliga forest.
If you get corrosion or shearing occurring in that well, you can allow cross-contamination. So you can allow movement of groundwater from one deep aquifer, so let's say the aquifer where they've got the coal seams and where they're extracting the gas from, it has poor quality groundwater, that can migrate up through that broken well into another aquifer.
And these faults in fracking wells only increase over time.
They went out and they surveyed 45,000 offshore oil and gas wells and asked a very simple question: how many of them are leaking? Young wells fail at the rate of 1 in 20. And as wells age, the failure rate goes up because that cement starts to degrade. There are ground motions that cause the cement to crack. The cement shrinks over time. The casing starts to corrode. The degradation between the casing and the cement goes to hell. The degradation between the cement and the rock goes to hell, and pretty soon more than half of your wells are leaking.
It's pretty well impossible into the forest to clean up the areas that the spills have already contaminated. The sand in the Pilliga forest will clean it up naturally, but over a period of time that'll move on, and you get enough rain and that pushes down through the Boina Creek into the Namoi River. It runs to Walgett. The townspeople get the water out of the Namoi River when the Barwon's not flowing. They could take that in through their own bodies, through their families, their kids. That joins the Barwon. It flows right down to Adelaide in the end, joining all the rivers together. Any of the towns that use the water out of that could be contaminated in the long run in the future. It might take a year, it might take 7, 5, but we'll get there in the end. Any pollutants will get there in the end.
The whole ground was like that, like this black, sticky, gooey tar mess. But that's, occasionally you see it because it's constantly trying to surface. You can see that's a hard, salty, oily layer. You can see how it's like diesel, like an oil. So.
This is about the 6th planting of saplings in here. And this is what happens. The tree guards fall over, they're anchored into the ground with metal stakes that never come out again, and the trees just die.
They're spraying water on there, and meanwhile everyone else is in drought. We're drinking bottled water from the city donated, and they're wasting megalitres of water on this. As it rains, it's just leaching and getting bigger and bigger, the kill zone. So the idea of putting thousands and thousands of megalitres of water onto here actually is just spreading the poison and making the zone bigger.
Of course.
But I was putting a wellhead together one day and it was red hot, and we left a trailer of a truck there, and I was working underneath that over the wellhead, putting the valves and the fittings on it, and a kangaroo came down for a drink. He had a few ticks on him. He came down to the earthen pond that was there, left over from the drill rig after the drill rig had left. He had a drink out of that, and the next day he was dead sitting there. That's not the first time it happened. There was other days it happened. Goats, other animals. With a couple of the wells, you had to go in and shut them down and pull the filters out and clean the bones of the birds, the lizards, snakes, all the reptiles that were caught in the dams. You had to clean them out so that the pumps would run efficiently again after that. Yeah, that sort of turned me against it a bit.
One of the reasons that people are promoting, or industries are promoting, using gas, say, compared to coal, is that for a given amount of energy, burning gas emits about half the greenhouse gases as coal. And that's usually based on carbon dioxide. But here's the problem, is that when you add in these so-called fugitive emissions, leakage from the mining process, it only takes about 3 or 4% leakage, and gas becomes nearly as damaging, or as damaging as coal in terms of the climate. So basically, in projects like Narrabri, we may not be doing anything better than a Hunter Valley coal mine in terms of its impact on the climate. Now, the problem with fugitive emissions are they're very hard to manage. They're not evenly spread across the landscape. So even in one gas field like Narrabri, some wells could have very large fugitive emissions, other wells none. So it's extremely hard to extrapolate from one or a few sites to know what the overall effect is.
Because of all of this stuff you're digging out of the ground and taking out of the ground, it's going to affect us all, not just us out in the Pilliga, not just Australia, it's going to affect everybody on the globe.
Globally, the increase of atmospheric methane concentration is going up. And most of that is tracked back to an expansion of the gas industry, including here in Australia. So already we're seeing that this is having an impact on the global climate.
In order to get gas out, one of the first things you have to do is to dewater the coal seams. All right, so you're pumping out a large amount of groundwater. By taking all of that water out, you lower the groundwater pressure. By lowering groundwater pressure, you can induce flow. And so by pumping out lots and lots of groundwater, you get this large regional drop in groundwater pressure. Where that groundwater connects to surface water, say for streams, you'll have a lower flow, or sometimes maybe even stop that flow. So by inducing that big pressure change, you're potentially inducing groundwater to flow in ways that it doesn't normally.
When you've got decreased amount of water in, that means you increase the temperature of the water. So that affects our native fish species, the yabbies in the water, the native plants that grow in the water. It affects all of those simply because there's a drop in the water table. So then the environment really struggles, and then because the environment struggles, we struggle.
These aquifers support the entire region. In towns like Coonamble, if they can't access good quality bore water, their farming operations will fail. People won't be able to live there. The landscape will slowly dry out because the water table is falling.
There's farmers here that they've been told black and white, you will lose your bore. Yeah. And Council's position is, we're not worried about those dozen landholders that will lose their bore and will have no way of farming. All we're worried about is whether or not the gas field can get its gas out with the coal mine there.
By decreasing the groundwater pressure and effectively dewatering the coal seams, which is how they get the gas to start flowing, they don't always capture all of the gas. Now, what we've seen in the Surat Basin especially is that you will start to get that gas migrate to the nearest point where it can flow. And that may be a farmer's groundwater bore, which we've seen many examples of that across the Surat Basin. We've also seen where that gas flows up the Conda mine. What we're seeing in the Conda mine is far in excess of anything natural. And so I think it's clearly related to what we're seeing with the effects of coal seam gas in the Surat Basin.
At the end of the day, you need to think about the fact that your bread is made from wheat that is likely to be produced in the northwest.
Water that we've sucked off the top of the coal seam, which has also got a bit of dinosaur water mixed in with it and a few radioactive herbs and spices, it gets promoted to a producer as being good replacement for what they've just lost. And so that you'll find that water, which may not be as pure or as clean as was in the past, is being used for food production.
This food is all for the city people. All the food markets that used to be around, little market gardens that used to be around Penrith and all your suburbs in Sydney, they're housing estates now, they're all gone. It comes from up here, it comes from out the bush, where these gas fields, where they're pumping it in, and then it goes to the city. So you're eating whatever's there.
The whole planet relies on this food bowl here. We've got one of the best food bowls on the planet, definitely Australia. And you just think this is madness. You can't put a gas pipeline across a food producing, it just stuffs it.
Where the Narrabri Gas Project is located is right on the eastern edge of an area which is part of the Great Artesian Basin. That's one of our biggest groundwater systems in Australia, and so the potential connections and risks for what happens with the Narrabri Gas Project could affect the groundwater resources of the Great Artesian Basin, and I think that to me is an extremely serious issue.
The Great Artesian Basin is one of the largest and most important underground water resources in Australia. It covers 1/5 of the continent and provides underground water to parts of Australia that would otherwise be deserts. And this is the basin that the Narrabri Gas Project is depressurizing. It's also being built on the recharge zone of the basin. These are the parts that are able to refill the aquifer, which are these parts in yellow that are at a higher level than the rest of the basin. And the Pilliga is a crucial part of this recharge zone.
It's a particularly high recharge zone because it's relatively undisturbed, because it is a forest and because it doesn't have too much roads or different landscape impacts. So it recharges at a much higher rate than other recharge zones.
The tree roots pull water down and the forest acts like a giant sponge, locking in water underground so that it can be used later downstream. And the Narrabri Gas Project is going to be built on this area of the recharge zone. This could fundamentally change the way the basin is able to refill itself.
If the Great Artesian Basin is not being recharged, there will be no water in the Great Artesian Basin.
So the Narrabri Gas Project doesn't just affect the water locally, it could affect the water of the entire basin. That's 1/5 of Australia that relies on that water.
We have such a dry climate. These last 2 years where the drought was just so tough, for me, it just crystallised how important water is. Like we just can't be doing things that pollute it or that reduce it in our landscape because we just don't have very much of it.
It's pain, pain and heartache. Yeah. Rivers without healthy fish populations, people being poisoned. We're all in pain together. Yeah. It's the same as the river web. Yeah. The human web is the same web.
My great-grandmother wasn't this desperate dealing with invasion. You look at what happened on Invasion Day. They're doing the same thing here. They're just jumping on and raping, pillaging and plundering whatever they want. We're dying along with our rivers.
It's all linked up. Cashless welfare card, work for the dole. It's just clobbering people who are getting clobbered, and it's really intense.
And it's just it's a barrage. There's no stop, and when
they're all levels of violence. Yeah, it's all violent, isn't it? It's all being really cruel.
The resources sector has a working majority in the national parliament and in all the state and territory parliaments, and it maintains that working majority no matter who wins government. That's what's so dangerous about it. It's very difficult to fix it with an election because the same people are still the ones writing the checks, no matter which of the major parties you end up forming government. And I know from my time in state parliament as well that industry, it's not that unusual actually for lobbyists right across the board if there's a bill being debated to just walk the corridors with proposed amendments that they've had their legal counsel draft. It's very, very common. But let's not pretend that it's not happening. A lot of the laws that you see that pertain to the resources sector have been drafted by that sector. That's very, very common. And in the Australian context, we're clearly dealing with something more than corruption. Just the donations or the revolving doors, the relationships. There are no laws being broken. So for me, it's not as though there's paper bags full of cash being exchanged because they don't need to do that. In South Africa, they called that state capture. And I think in Australia, that's what we're suffering.
They try to seek community acceptance for the branding and the company name. They do hire very nice people who live in the community, hold very nice events, and they support with their very nice checkbook.
If you get sponsorship of them, you've got to actively support them. So what they do is they'll pick a leading 7-year-old soccer team or a football team. They'll sponsor them. And then all the parents in that team can't badmouth Santos. You've got to actively support them for your team to get those jumpers and to get it paid for and to get the sponsorship.
We're proud to partner with them. They always come to the party with something. It's great. They're a great sponsor. So yeah, thanks to Santos.
It's sickening to watch Santos putting pictures up of their brand name around hospitals, around schools, around parks.
Those are things that Australians should enjoy wherever they live. But what industries become very good at is providing it where there's a gap and then threatening to withdraw it if they don't get their way. So it's buying a form of social licence to operate that they simply don't deserve when governments should be funding and providing that amenity for people.
And you talk a lot about social licence. Clearly you do not have social licence in North West New South Wales, and I think it's about time the board and the shareholders see that and face up to it. You're never going to get social licence for the Narrabri Gas Project, and if you are genuine about respecting local communities, you need to walk away from that project.
That's a view, and I think we are serious about it, and we're serious about our ability to work with local communities, and we're very proud of our ability to do that, and we'll continue to push our belief in that space.
There's a lot of us saying we don't want it in town, and I think that's going to cause quite a bit of conflict in the future with how more companies wanting to come in and more mines wanting to expand.
It does create a lot of jobs. I'm not going to lie, there is a lot of people in this town that benefit from it and create jobs. I just moved down here recently and I've got a job.
So, how many people will the Narrabri Gas Project employ? Well, according to Santos's website, the project will employ 1,300 people during its construction phase. And once the construction phase is done, it will continuously employ 200 people. That's 200 people for a project that spans 95,000 hectares.
In Roma and Chinchilla, when it constructed the gas fields, there was employment. But once they're actually up and running, the employment winds right back. And the boom's pretty short-lived. We're only talking a boom for maybe 18, 20 months, a couple of years maybe, and then you get a bust. And essentially, you don't need many people to run a gas field that's actually already been developed. There's not a lot of construction work, not a lot of work to do. One person can run a lot of wells. They go around and just check on them and monitor them remotely. So, it's not an employment-intensive business.
So, let's take a look at the alternative, renewables. Well, a study by UTS found that renewables could create 45,000 new jobs Australia-wide. That's 15,000 new jobs in New South Wales alone. And most of those would be in regional areas. That's 10,000 jobs for regional New South Wales.
Communities end up very hollowed out, particularly when it's capital-intensive industries, or industries that are destroying the landscape to such a degree that they're driving other industries away, whether it be agriculture, horticulture, pastoral industries, tourism.
What concerns do you have about it?
Farmers, yes, like their livestock, their crops, everything. That's their livelihood out there. That's like their whole life. And then just for getting a signed piece of paper, the mines can just walk over there and destroy it all. That's my real concern.
Real problematic for our younger generations coming up now is to face that dilemma. I want to go to university, I can't afford it. But here's this opportunity where this conglomerate, this huge international mining company, there's a pathway for me there. We shouldn't have that as, part of our society, that we need to make those type of choices to basically sacrifice everything that we believe in.
It's just the total dislocation that gas brings, right? it brings to local economies. And the best example is to look at places like Roma, Chinchilla. They all had massive real estate booms when the industry first came to town. House prices went up, rents went up. A lot of the locals had to leave because rents were too expensive now, and the people left their jobs in the local towns and went to work in the gas fields because the money was better. And suddenly you had industries in town that couldn't sustain themselves anymore, and you had people moving out. It almost inevitably involves a boom and then a bust.
So you got friends in Rellos who were really poor, and then they're cashed up. They're working in the mines. Yeah. They're cashed up. They could be the first person to be cashed up for 150 years or ever, in that sense. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then it's the debt. So then it's like, well, we don't really like mining, but geez, I've got a big debt because their friggin' mansion they've just, you know what I mean? It's that capitalist trap, and it's swallowing up more and more people and land.
Yeah. If you look at the model, which is how they did it in Queensland, is they went into the state forest first, just like they've tried to do here. They chose a town that was deeply conservative, highly parochial, and definitely low socio-economic. I say that with all respect about Narrabri. I think it's an awesome town. But the gas industry chooses their locations very well, and they try to get in before anyone knows about it, and they start in the forest, and once they finish with the forest, they spread out into the surrounding area. They come in the forest and then they go for the farmland. That is their model. It's worked for them. It's been a raging success for them in Queensland because they got in before anyone knew what was going on.
Even if you're going to see what Santos have done out in the scrub now, you have to remind yourself that what you're seeing is a pilot project. This is an enormous operation.
It's like a virus. It will just keep replicating and multiplying and carrying on, spreading out.
They're basically proposing to do an industrial landscape out there, chop it up into little blocks, and anyone who's had anything to do with ecology or flora or fauna out there is horrified with the prospect.
We have to stop this in the forest or it will come to you. It will come. They will get in everywhere if we don't stop it here.
In 2020, before the Independent Planning Commission approved the Narrabri Gas Project, there was a petition that was signed by 23,000 people, and 98% of those people were against the project. And even with all of that, the project was approved.
Despite 23,000 objections, most in the form of form letters to the Independent Planning Commission, that the development will be approved.
And I think this shows that the state and federal governments aren't listening to us. They're not going to listen to a record-breaking petition. They're not going to listen to people that are campaigning for a renewable future just by asking.
It's designed to make us feel powerless, that we have to wait around for an election that won't fix anything. It's completely untrue. I think we still obviously need to stay very engaged in electoral politics. But also for me, we have to fight this between elections. We can't wait for political processes to fix this. We have to take things into our own hands much more.
And history has shown us that when communities organize together, we can achieve the impossible.
So I'm from Kyogle. We had a company called Metgasco that wanted to come and make our region into a gas field. There was a well down the road from me. It was only 10 k's down the road from me. So I actually saw the rig signs one day, and I really didn't want that near my home. So I got involved with my local group, and we put on a massive protest at Bentley, and we ended up getting rid of Metgasco.
What we're hoping to achieve is to demonstrate to the community and demonstrate to the politicians and demonstrate to the media and demonstrate to the regulators and lawmakers and investors that CSG is not welcome in the Northern Rivers.
They found out about it first, and they were able to mobilise their community to say, no, we don't want it here. But Santos pretty much snuck into Narrabri. They started splashing their cash around. They knew what model they were following because they had already done it in Roma.
It was community building. It was very bottom up. It was locally driven. When they were ready, they sought support from outside. But you know that the leadership and the people doing the hard work were all locals, and they took control of that at an early stage, and they won. But it's important to notice that we routinely beat them. We routinely win.
So apart from voting and signing a petition, here's something practical you can do to keep Santos honest. First, go to the Pilliga and see how beautiful it is, and then monitor it. Keep an eye on Santos. There's a lot of citizen science work collecting water and soil samples around the gas fields, testing for their toxicity and monitoring Santos activities so that they're held accountable to their environmental regulations.
So we've gone to a contaminated site, which we're not sure what Santos actually did there. And then we've gone to this control site, which Santos has actually kept away from. So we're testing the sediment there. So then we'll be able to compare these two sites to see what the actual effects of the Santos mining is. These kill sites, these massive areas are logged and cleared, but we don't know the chemicals that are actually in these waters. So it's really important to actually see that. Like, it is getting tested, of course, by like Santos and the government, but we don't know how reliable that information is. We don't know their methods, and we don't know the scientific practice behind them.
A lot of the things that do go wrong are reported by citizens, and it's citizens who are keeping Santos honest because the government isn't out here. So if we're not watching them, then no one is.
If Bentley is an example of community-driven activism that can match the scale against a gas company, then we can do it here in Narrabri. And this isn't just about Narrabri and the surrounding towns of the Pilliga. This is about all of us. Everyone in Australia. If you drink water, if you eat food, this concerns you, this affects you. And they think that they can just roll in through because they have the funding and they have the political backing, but they don't have the community backing, and we need to show them that they don't. If communities could organize in Bentley to stop gas from rolling through the northern rivers, then we're going to need a nationwide coordination to stop gas from rolling across this entire continent, because that's really what we're up against.
This is a preview of what's coming at you, Sydney. How we react here and how strong we are in our position. They will do what we let them do. You know, we've got to show some resistance. It's enough.
Like I said before, it's the same old, and a lot of what's happening out there is to maintain the status quo. And if we truly, truly want to, become the great nation as Australia, that we should be by now, it's where we've got to say, the status quo is just, we don't accept that anymore.
Vote for candidates that aren't supported by the fossil fuel industry. Write to your MP that you don't want them supporting this. Organize in your workplace. Imagine if there was a general strike across the entire country to stop the government from funding fossil fuels. I think they would listen then.
Water is a unifying force. It really is. You've got your traditional custodians, you've got your farmers, you've got your conservationists, you've got your townsfolk. But the one common thing that they all need is the water. And unity is so important to this campaign. I cannot stress it enough. People need to come together. The people have the power to stop this project. And if they come together, they will win.